the silent hero of Willow Creek. The kids laughed when he passed. The parents called him dangerous. Then the tornado came. By the time the winds died down, the man they wanted gone had saved their children one by one. What happened next changed a town forever. Hi everyone, welcome to the Pillow Files. Let's get started. On a warm Saturday evening in Willow Creek, an unusual silence reigned. The town's narrow streets, as if intentionally paved with stones, seemed to hold their breath before a storm of change. Every building here preserved the history of generations. The old school with its wide windows, the small pastry shop at the crossroads, where they still remembered great-grandmother Berta's best cakes, the old maple pub with its worn sign, and the time-darkened trees under which children played in winter. But this quiet town was home not only to peace and serenity. Rumors of past events blended with the present, and few expected that everything would change so swiftly. Mrs. Callahan, the English teacher, had watched Mr. Dorsey with understanding and compassion for a long time. From the first day he worked at the school, she noticed how students glanced at one another, whispered behind his back, and mockingly threw paper airplanes at his janitorial cart. Many teachers, trying to keep their distance and avoid trouble, turned to him with blind indifference, as if he didn't exist at all. But Mrs. Callahan never considered him invisible. Her heart always told her that behind his gloomy exterior lay a story worthy of respect. Every evening, before locking her classroom door, she placed a warm cup of tea by his cart, knowing he rarely allowed himself such small comforts after a long day. She understood that his muteness was not the sole reason for his isolation. Beyond the transparent wall of silence lay a soul weathered by the chill of battle and the isolation of prison, where he had spent several years after returning from the war. A few days ago, a scandal had erupted. One of a student's parents, without examining the details, complained that Dorsey allegedly mishandled the cleaning equipment, even though no one had seen any proof. Parents, wishing to protect their children, demanded the school rid itself of the gloomy janitor with the terrible past. The school board, fearing public backlash, voted to dismiss him. The moment the decision became known, Mrs. Callahan went to the principal's office and declared firmly that she would resign alongside him if he were forced out. But the administration, threatening bad press, refused to change course. She left. The office took Dorsey's shoulder and looked into his eyes, trying to convey without words, "I won't abandon you." Tension immediately filled the school. Students debated whether it was kind to complain about a man who could not respond in words, and what that said about their own values. Yet most pupils continued laughing, making cruel jokes. A few boys even recorded themselves blocking Dorsey's path, tossing a ball so he would trip and shouting taunts. Their parents either approved such antics or looked the other way, as though believing it's just childish mischief. One by one, doors closed in Dorsey's face. He was no longer allowed into the teacher's lounge, where he used to bring cleaning supplies every morning to help out. Watching it all, Mrs. Callahan barely held back her tears. How could she explain to the children that prejudice is worse than any mistake? For many years, Mr. Dorsey had been a living legend in Willow Creek. As a soldier, he had been renowned as a fearless scout. After being wounded and losing the ability to speak, the town had welcomed him warmly, buying him a prosthetic for his right leg so he could continue working. But the days in prison left scars deeper than any wound. The details of his incarceration were unknown. Rumors swirled that he'd ended up behind bars after a fight in which someone died, but no one knew the truth. Moreover, anyone who tried to investigate risked courting danger from those determined to keep old secrets buried. Slowly but surely, in the townspeople's eyes, he became defined by that supposed error of the past, even though no one remembered, that he had once saved an entire company of comrades. On the day of his dismissal, Mrs. Callahan arrived at the gym early in the morning, where he was already scrubbing the floors. He looked up, and his dark eyes, full of sadness and gratitude, met her gentle gaze. She handed him a steaming cup of tea and gently touched his shoulder saying without words, "Thank you for all you have done for these children." He nodded, and for a moment, a faint spark of hope flickered in his eyes. That tiny glimmer made her believe that somewhere inside him, kindness still lived. When they left the empty gym together, the wind carried the scent of lilacs blooming in the yard beside the school fence, and Mrs. Callahan felt the chill in her resolve, warm from a new determination. She would not let this man break. A few days passed. No one at the school had seen Mr. Dorsey. His old log cabin outside of town was largely avoided. Each evening, as the sun set, he would step onto his porch, gaze at the thinning clouds, and clutching a worn copper ring in his hands, recall his life. The roar of battles, the silence of a prison cell, the echoing hallways of the school, and the whispers of those who mocked him. He thought of Mrs. Callahan and the rare moments when someone let him be part of their story. He knew the town would likely never forgive his past, but he still believed that someday people would judge him by his deeds, not by rumors. He remembered how, as a child, his mother had said that kindness is a light capable of illuminating the darkest night, and those memories would not let him rest. On the eve of the tornado, Willow Creek's residents gathered the last supplies from stores: grains, water, candles, and batteries. The wind began to toy with the tree branches, but most townsfolk dismissed it as a light breeze. Mrs. Callahan, however, sensed something was wrong. Students returned home with anxious looks, discussing the incoming storm front. She hurried to the school, but a sudden message flashed on her phone. "Tornado approaching the eastern side of town. Evacuate immediately." Her heart pounded wildly. If she arrived late, the empty school hallway would be filled with panic. A crowd of parents formed at the school gates, refusing to leave until they were certain their children were safe. Chaos reigned. The loud wail of sirens, the roar of rescue trucks, the hollow thump of boots on wet pavement. The wind whipped up debris into a swirling dance, menacingly rustling as though taunting the people. The tornado, a grey, hellish vortex, broke free and headed toward the town like a gigantic arm. In panic, Mr. Dorsey raced across the soccer field. He had heard children's voices trapped inside. Mrs. Callahan followed closely, but through the roar of the wind, she realized help had to be immediate. The building rattled as the tornado tore rooftops and ripped off signs, crushing cars in its path. Every second counted. She knew that any rescue team was trapped in their own fear. Through the raging wind, Mrs. Callahan heard faint footsteps. She glanced up and saw a familiar figure, Mr. Dorsey. His clothes, as always, were faded and dirty, but at that moment he seemed stronger than anyone. His eyes, usually hidden under dark brows, blazed with resolve. Without a word, he signaled for Mrs. Callahan to follow him. They darted down a narrow service corridor whose walls remembered old school secrets. Dorsey deftly opened a hatch leading to the basement, where emergency supplies were stored. Mrs. Callahan sprinted through the cramped tunnel, barely keeping pace with him. The wind behind them grew fiercer, and the basement walls trembled under the tornado's onslaught. They emerged into a spacious room where once crates of preserves and old chairs had been kept. Dorsey nodded toward a door leading to the gym, where he knew a few little ones remained, still taking their physical education lesson. At that moment, the corridor ceiling partially collapsed, but Dorsey did not stop. The gym's walls buckled, the basketball hoop mounts bent, and the roof began to sag. A cry rang out from under the rubble. "Help us!" Without hesitation, Dorsey plunged into the falling boards and dust. His silhouette flickered among the debris as he swept up Margot, a 5-year-old girl cowering under a bench, and then returned for 2 boys trapped beneath a collapsed spotlight. Each time he appeared, his movements were precise and swift, as if he knew exactly where each crack in the floor lay. Dust mixed with the children's tears, but in their eyes already shone a glimmer of hope. Mrs. Callahan, forgetting her own fear, rushed behind him. She watched as Dorsey handed the children to teachers who had arrived to help, then plunged back in to find one more boy who screamed when the roof caved in behind him. At that moment, the tornado blew out a gym window, and a blast of wind rushed inside, hurling chairs and tennis backboards. But Dorsey did not flinch. He hoisted the boy onto his shoulders and, bracing against a broken railing, steadily made his way toward the hatch leading to the basement. At last, everything behind them collapsed. The walls began to tilt, and the ceiling threatened to cave in. Dorsey, balancing precariously, thrust the boy into the safe room and then climbed back into the corridor. He gasped for breath, but his eyes burned with determination. Mrs. Callahan seized his hand and drew him close, weeping tears of joy and relief. When the storm finally subsided, the town lay in splintered ruin. Roofs were torn off, trees uprooted, and window panes shattered. Yet amid the chaos, people suddenly realized a true hero had come from the very ones they had cast aside. Mr. Dorsey was met with quiet applause, and he chose to shrink away, as if still unaccustomed to human warmth. His soaked shirt and hands, covered in scrapes, told the story of the ordeal he'd just endured. Radio broadcasts called for more aid. Neighbors helped one another haul away the wreckage, find usable supplies, and search for survivors. Among the worried faces, Mrs. Callahan wrapped her arms around Dorsey's shoulders and whispered, "You were right, Mr. Dorsey. A real hero isn't someone who speaks loudly, but someone who acts when no one expects it." In the days that followed, the people of Willow Creek changed. Students who once laughed at Dorsey now came to his home, bearing baskets of fresh fruits and vegetables harvested from neighboring gardens. Parents brought homemade cookies, and some teachers offered to help repair his cabin on the town's edge. News of his heroism spread throughout the county, and even folks from nearby towns came to express their gratitude. And Mrs. Callahan saw, in her pupils, exactly what she had taught them: kindness, compassion, honesty. She began holding classes outdoors, where the children spoke of how they had helped one another clear away the debris, what the ordeal had taught them, and why it was important not to remain indifferent. Many students drew scenes of Dorsey as a rescuer, while others depicted the school rebuilt with new windows and playgrounds where children played without fear. The teacher both laughed and cried at once as she witnessed those drawings, reflecting the change in each heart. Weeks had passed since the tornado, but its quiet echo still resonated in the souls of Willow Creek's residents. The ruined houses and streets only served to unite people further. They worked side by side, helping neighbors rebuild roofs, repaint walls, and clear the wreckage. Each home became a symbol of collective strength, for no one allowed tragedy to divide them. Mrs. Callahan was one of the main organizers of a day of restoration, a celebration where everyone could contribute in their own way. On the field behind the school, they set up a large tent, surrounding it with tables laden with baked goods from local farms: apple pies, fresh rolls, honey gingerbread. A contest was announced for the best drawing representing what the world looked like after the storm. Children eagerly picked up brushes and pencils, depicting blooming trees, smiling people, and a bright sun they believed would never again be obscured by clouds. Mrs. Callahan watched as children who, a few weeks earlier, had taunted each other, now worked shoulder to shoulder, clearing glass shards and rusted nails from the lawn. At the center of the field stood a makeshift stage, decorated with garlands of paper flowers and the state's flags. On that stage was to appear Mr. Dorsey himself. Despite his reserved nature and reluctance to be the center of attention, he agreed, wanting to thank everyone for allowing him to demonstrate his kindness. When the microphone crackled, he walked into the spotlight. He wore a new shirt given to him by one of the students' mothers and clean trousers purchased by volunteers. His face, usually hidden behind a solemn expression, seemed brighter than ever when he smiled. "I never thought I would see the day when the very same people who once turned away from me now want to help me," he said softly, each word resonating deeply. For the first time, he spoke without second-guessing, for he had long grown accustomed to silence. "The word thank you cannot truly express my gratitude," he continued, "but I hope my actions have shown you that kindness knows no bounds. I am grateful I could help, and I will continue to do so in the future." The townspeople erupted in applause. Many could not hold back their tears, feeling their own hearts opening to one another. The volunteer camp was overseen by Lena, the mother of 2 schoolchildren. She had once believed Mr. Dorsey too mysterious and feared for her children's safety. Now she directed work crews clearing debris, while her grown sons helped neighbors erect new roof frames. Lena approached Mrs. Callahan and, without holding back her emotions, confided, "I see my children learning to be brave and not afraid to help someone like Mr. Dorsey. Thank you, Mrs. Callahan, for seeing in him not a stranger, but a friend." The teacher smiled and nodded. Her mission had been fulfilled. Meanwhile, the students took a moment to present the mayor of Willow Creek with a large poster reading, "Mr. Dorsey, our hero." Each child signed it and drew a small picture, some depicting a raging sea, others a peaceful sky over the school. The contrast between the fear that had gripped the town during the tornado and the hope that blossomed afterward was striking. When the poster was given to Dorsey, he timidly touched it, as if afraid to spill all the love he felt. Tears welled in his eyes, but he did not know whether they were tears of joy or of relief that people in this world still possessed empathy. Before winter approached, the town council decided to commemorate the tornado and Mr. Dorsey's heroism by erecting a monument in the central square. It was a simple but expressive sculpture, a figure extending a hand of help beside the silhouette of a child leaning on their rescuer. On the plaque were inscribed the words, "In honor of those who bravely faced the storm and taught the town to value one another." The monument's unveiling was a momentous event. Families flocked to the ceremony, many unable to hold back tears as they remembered how one man had done everything to save the lives of others. Mr. Dorsey himself preferred to stand to the side, watching people approach the monument, lay bouquets of wildflowers, speak words of gratitude, and share memories of that day. In his eyes, weathered by years, reflected a simple truth. You never know how your actions might change someone's life. He remembered the stray dog he had once rescued from beneath the wheel of a truck and smiled, thinking that courage could manifest in the smallest of deeds. Though he could not speak, his kindness and bravery spoke louder than any words. Months later, life in Willow Creek steadily returned to its familiar rhythm. Students arrived late to school as before. Berta's pastry shop once again baked the region's best pies, and live music filled the Old Maple pub on weekend nights. Yet every time people passed the monument, they reminded themselves of that day when the dirty, mute janitor became the sole lifesaver beneath the rubble. They began to see one another differently. Now each face revealed not merely a neighbor, but a potential friend and ally. Mrs. Callahan, walking down the corridor of the school where whispers and mockery once echoed, now heard only gentle voices of students discussing their next project, creating a video about kindness to share on social media and inspire young viewers throughout the county. She knew that education was not merely lessons in grammar or mathematics, but life lessons that helped one understand that a true hero is someone who never loses faith in humanity. In that moment, she smiled, realizing that thanks to fate, due to the storm, and to the man everyone had once rejected, Willow Creek had gained a new heart that would beat with every act of kindness. Meanwhile, Mr. Dorsey returned to his daily duties. Each morning at dawn, he walked across the deserted schoolyard, wiped down desks, checked the fire hydrants, and made sure the floors were free of dangerous debris. He performed his tasks as diligently as before, but now his footsteps echoed with silent gratitude, reflected in the smiles of children, passers-by, and teachers alike. He paused by the old fence, where once red roses, planted by his commander's widow during his military days, had grown. Those original roses probably did not survive the tornado, but he had planted new saplings, carefully watering them morning and night. A year ago, he would have simply tended the grounds without a word. Now his steps carried purpose, to remain, a light for those living in the shadow of others' prejudices. He remembered his childhood, The little house on the edge of the park, his mother teaching him to recite poetry and caring for stray cats. She often said, "Do not judge a man if you do not know what he has endured. Be a light for those living in darkness." He had carried these words with him when he first went to war and saw people die, and later, in cold despair during imprisonment. He held no grudges against those who had driven him away from the school. Instead, he chose to help. He believed that actions speak louder than any speech, and it was his actions that had altered the fates of Willow Creek's children, parents, and teachers. One evening, he stopped by the school wall and noticed new graffiti, an image of a figure with outstretched arms surrounded by children. Beneath the words, "We are one," someone had signed it. "Thank you, Mr. Dorsey." He touched the paint with his fingers, and his heart filled with a warm glow. He looked up at the sky. Stars shone above, as if each one were someone's gratitude. He smiled softly, recalling his mother's gentle voice and the scent of linden tea she brewed for him before dawn, and Willow Creek changed forever. People ceased to fear those who were different. Before passing judgment, they now sought to learn one another's stories. The school introduced empathy lessons where students discussed what it means to sympathize with those who suffer in silence. Each morning, as Mr. Dorsey began his rounds, he heard not cold whispers, but friendly greetings. "Good morning, Mr. Dorsey." He would respond with a slight nod, for he knew sometimes a quiet acknowledgement is more meaningful than loud words. And in that silence, true magic was born. The magic of kindness capable of changing 1,000 lives at once. Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal the quiet power of kindness. See you in the next one.